Hello and welcome to my FN2 Honda Civic Type R. So why do I have one of these then? Or rather, why have I had multiples of these? Well, truth be told, I've always had a bit of an affinity for these cars. I think they're really well engineered and even today represent quite an exciting package. In terms of money, 4 or 5 grand, it's not a lot for what you're getting, and let me tell you why. Let's talk about the engine first, because it was the engine that made a Honda Civic Type R a Honda Civic Type R in this era. So what did we have? 2 litre K20, 200-ish brake horsepower, absolutely sod all torque. Flawed? Yes, but then again, so's my Rottweiler and I love him just fine. Now, even back when these things were in production, all the competition was going turbocharged. And that, for me, was the great differentiator. If you wanted the naturally aspirated screamer, the Honda always offered it. It's a bit of a shame we don't have that option now, really. Anyway, let's not dwell onto the gearbox. No good having an absolute cracking engine and a cack gearbox, is it? But thankfully it's not the case in this. It's one of the best gearboxes that I've ever experienced, actually. Proper rifle bolt action. I know that's been said to death in motoring journalism, but it really is the case in both this, the FN2, and the EP3 that came before. Honestly, I would place it probably in my top 3 gearboxes, and the other 2 cars in that category cost 10 times as much as one of these does. Now, they can have the occasional problem, however. I'm going to add a link to my buyer's guide on this very car at the end of this video. Make sure you check that out. Don't do it now though, do it at the end of this video, because I've put a bit of effort into this one for you. Next up, let's talk about the most contentious part about the FN2 Type R. We couldn't make a review and not mention this, and that is the rear suspension. You know what's coming up here, don't you? So Honda, in their infinite wisdom, decided to use a torsion bar for the rear suspension. Pretty old school design, and a bit behind the EP3 and the Type Rs that came before, which had fully independent rear suspension. Now, why did they do this? Well, I assume it was probably a commercial decision. They probably just thought no one would care, and in reality, they learned that people really did care. See, this for me is where it gets a little bit tricky, because unpopular opinion incoming here, I don't think that that torsion beam justifies the hate that this car got as a result of it. Sure, absolutely, I'm going to choose fully independent rear suspension just like you would any day of the week. But let's face it, the majority of people who actually went out and bought one of these cars is much more likely to be using it for going for the shopping at Sainsbury's rather than going down to Silverstone. So day to day, I'm just not convinced that it impacts the driving experience that much. What do you guys think? Drop a comment below and we can geek out together on this subject. So rather remarkably, the interior doesn't feel old. It still feels pretty modern, pretty sci-fi, and I suspect that's probably because when these cars first came out, they were that modern in the interior department that it actually turned a few people off from them. Yeah, some of the materials are a bit on the cheap side, but one thing I will say is this car is approaching 100,000 miles and there's barely a creak or rattle on the move. If I can have one criticism jumping into this interior, it's the seats. Now, the seats themselves are fantastic, but it's the way that they're mounted. It's just an inch or two too high. It kind of feels like when you're a kid and you're playing one of those arcade games and you kind of sit on the machine rather than in it. It's a bit like that. Anyway, small gripe. Let's get on the move. Now we're actually hustling the car along some back roads. What are we noticing? Well, right away I'm going to start with what I think is one of the most underappreciated parts about the FN2. Now, I think this can apply to the EP3 as well. It's been a while since I've driven one. If anyone wants to lend me one out there to confirm, I would only be too happy to accept, but it's the steering. Specifically, it's how responsive and direct the steering is. You can just place the car so accurately. Small steering inputs equal big directional changes, and it just suits the style of car so well. I find myself getting back into much more expensive performance cars and wishing the steering was a wee bit more like this. Input weights, here's another decidedly geeky topic for us to get into. Or rather, what I should say here is how well the FN2 nails matching its input weights. What I'm getting at here is the steering, the clutch, the brake, the throttle, the gearbox. Everything is so nicely choreographed and matches in terms of weight that it means getting in one of these and finding your flow is just so easy and pleasant to do. I don't think enough importance is attached to having matched input weights, because it's really off-putting when you find a car that doesn't. So the engine, how does it fare in today's contemporary world? Fun. There's your one-word answer. Now here's the thing that keeps coming back to me. All the aspects that left this engine open to criticism when these cars were new, the need to rev it out, the lack of low-down torque, all these criticism points are what have given the Type R its unique desirability today. There's just something so rewarding about keeping it in the power band. And yeah, it's an experience that we just don't have nowadays. I'm going to say it again, it's a bit of a shame. Now coming back and addressing the suspension whilst on the move is something that I wanted to do, and there is only one problem as far as I can see, and it's the bloody springs. They are so stiff. It's nicely damped, this car, but the dampers barely get a chance to work because those springs are so bloody stiff, even after 100,000 miles of use. What that means is that on anything other than a perfectly smooth road, you're going to struggle to get the car settled. They got the hard bit right, the dampers. Surely someone out there has made some softer springs at some point. So how do we summarise the FN2? Well, love it or hate it, there's no denying that these cars changed the hot hatch landscape. At the time of production, they advanced what we came to expect a hot hatch to be, and today they serve as a reminder of a time gone by. I think a great way of determining how much impact a certain car has had is if its legacy lives on beyond its production cycle. And in the Type R's case, there's no doubt about that. Now thank you so much for watching. Now you can go off and watch that buyer's guide. Top right hand corner now. In return, let me tell you why. That bent in there. Do you think you'll hear that or?
Why it's hard to understand.